Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the Wolver Games YouTube channel. I hope we're doing fantastically well. We are back, and we are back for our very first World Cup fantasy video of course, the World Cup period. And so, welcome in if you're new to the channel. If you've come over, obviously, from the FPL or the UCL fantasy content that we generally do, we're going to be with you throughout the fantasy campaign. Probably do a few watch-alongs throughout the World Cup as well. So, welcome in. If you're new here or if you've been here before and you've not liked or subscribed, please do that on any of the content that you enjoy. Completely free, and I really appreciate it. So when we start kind of a fantasy campaign, I like to do it on UCL Fantasy as well. I just like to have an introduction video, explain any rules that might differ slightly from other fantasy games, just so we've got that grounding before we're jumping into making drafts. And of course, as we go through the tournament, like you've got certain tweaks compared to like a standard FPL where you can make changes during a match day. So I think it's good to outline them from the start so that can influence how we structure our teams. Like everyone have certain players on certain days throughout the tournament. So I think that's going to be really useful for us to do for a base kind of idea on the fantasy football model for the World Cup. And then we're going to have a follow-up video to this where we'll talk about first drafts, which will probably come early next week, over the weekend perhaps, and that'll get us ready for the start of the World Cup, which is next weekend. So exciting times for everyone to get involved in. I do like an international football competition. Obviously different circumstances in terms of where it's being hosted and issues around that, but I think the international football tournament is just so much levels above kind of like the friendlies or the Nations League that we generally can get a bit disengaged from it. So it's good to have a World Cup back. So let's jump into the rules this year for the Fantasy Football World Cup. So we're just going to kind of briefly go through the rules here and pick out some key points. Obviously selecting 15 players, as you generally will do, obviously competing against each other. Well, I'll leave you to the registration and login part. So team creation, you've got 100 million to build your team of 15 players. Pretty standard logic, and you can play any formation out of these. Below, the key bit is just you need to have the 3 defenders minimum, and then the 1 striker minimum is the kind of key bit you need to do there. Midfield obviously ranges from 2 to 5, so pretty standard if you've ever played any fantasy games. Of course, if you're new to that, make sure you watch out that you need to play one of those formations, but the game will stop you from like playing 2 defenders that don't have a all-out attack chip, as you may have seen some previous fantasy games have. So then we've got a bit of an idea of how you can structure your team. So throughout the tournament, in the group stage, you can have a maximum of 3 players per nation, but as you go through the knockout stages, you can get an extra player in around the 16 to quarterfinals, semi-finals, and then actually 2 extra players, so you're up to a max of 8 when you get to the final. Obviously you get restricted as you go through the tournament, and by the time you get to probably the semi-final and of course the final, you've got a very limited pot of players you can choose from, and just having to transfer players in for basically to get options that will play. Obviously a final can be very dependent on how heavy you want to go on one team. I remember having a Friends League on the previous World Cup. I think it was one of the ones that Spain won. I think it was the World Cup rather than the Euros, and we were kind of neck and neck the whole time going into the final. I think Jordi Alba scored for Spain to make it 4-0 right at the end of that final, and I had him captain, and that's what kind of pushed me over the edge. So you never know, all the way to the final can be tense stuff, making sure you get those right players. Yeah, so as you go throughout the tournament, you can increase the players if you're fancying the Brazil per my shirt, or an England per my, of course, trusted nation. You can get more players as you go through the tournament. Obviously, you've got limited pledges you can go for a certain time. So we talk about captain. I think this is a key bit which differs from maybe an FPL. If you're with us from UCL Fantasy, it's not much of a change. So each match day, which in the World Cup will be, for example, a match day 1 where everyone plays their first match of the tournament, throughout the match day, you can obviously assign a captain at the start, which will get you double points, but throughout the match day, just that one match day, obviously disregarding that in match day 2, you can change your captain. So if you For example, on the very first day of match day 1, just a hypothetical example here, you were captain Mbappe, didn't get any points for you, and you wanted to swap that on the day after, but in the same match day to like Neymar as an example, and then he scored points for you, then you'd keep the armband on him. You can switch between players within that match day as long as they play on different days, as it would work in UCL Fantasy. So you can change it. I think because of how this World Cup is spread, a match day is quite long compared to what we're used to. So just bear that in mind, and you can go for some gambles earlier on in the match day, but always have that backup kind of option when you get later on, depending on how the fixtures fall. So very similar to substitutions is how we would work on a UCL Fantasy kind of format. So you can change the lineup during the match day again. So again, exactly the same kind of example. Mbappe playing the first day gets 2 points. You've got Neymar on the bench, sub him in, and hopefully get more points than 2 points. So when you're setting up your lineup for that, you need to make sure you play your players who are playing earlier on in the match day. Make sure they're on the pitch. So if you've got, for example, Mbappe playing on the 25th of November and Neymar playing on the 27th, that'll be a perfect example. Put Mbappe on the pitch, put Neymar on the bench, and you can sub in or out however you want to do. Obviously, that's a very high profile example, and hopefully they both scored quite well if you've got them in your teams. But it's a bit of a tweak that you can do compared to FPL, where you kind of set on that 4 players on your bench, and you'll only get a substitute in there if one of those players doesn't play. In this kind of format that we have for the World Cup, that is different. So you can make manual substitutions during the match day, which is quite an interesting tweak, which I kind of prefer when it comes to UCL Fantasy, and it just shows the value of your complete 15 as well, rather than just relying on that 11, maybe 12 that you would when it comes to like a general FPL format. So an interesting one that we've got here. So this is titled as boosters. You could potentially call these chips, as you'll see in other kind of games. So we have 3 boosters which can be used throughout the tournament. There's a limit on the first booster where you can use it to first booster, as I think it's a pretty standard title, as you'll see across most fantasy games, would be a wild card. So that allows you to make unlimited transfers within one certain match day. So you could pick your match day 1 team, you want to completely change it for match day 2, so you'd wildcard in before match day 2, change the whole team, get a completely new team for that match day, which you'll have going forward. So obviously there's a caveat to this. You can't obviously wildcard on the first match day because you'll have unlimited transfers going into the World Cup, and then for the round of 16 you will also get unlimited transfers resetting after the group stage. So the most logical place, if you're doing it in the group stage, well, you've only got 2 options, would be on match day 2 or match day 3. So you might say you want to do that in match day 3 because some teams could have qualified already from their first 2 matches, so that could be a lot of rotation, and you want to focus on certain teams that have got to put the full effort in. So wildcard will have to be used in a kind of a different way to what we're used to, and probably more like a free hit in a way because it's such a short format. But it'll be an interesting one. And the other 2 boosters are slightly different from what you'd see in a standard one. You generally would have like a free hit or something, which you don't have in this format. We have the 12th man, which I quite like the idea of new chips or boosters that you get when it comes to like an international competition. So the 12th man will allow you to select 1 additional player to score points for your team in your match day. So obviously you'd generally have a team of 11, but you can choose a 12th man to also get points for. When selected, the 12th man cannot be substituted, captained, or transferred. So you're just going to be there with 1 set of that 12th man's points. So if you, it's a bit difficult in a way to how you would actually target that 12th man, because I think the bit that you cannot captain them. So you want your player to do well, but you don't actually want them to do fantastically well, because you would have probably preferred if you captain them. So it's kind of, you're going to have to think about your captaincy and your 12th man balancing them at the same time. So it's an interesting one that, obviously you get the benefit of having an extra player contributing to your points who you want to do well, but you don't want them to do fantastically well. So it's quite an interesting one that, but I would probably recommend using that in one of the earlier weeks probably match day 1 or 2, because you've got that chance of rotation in match day 3 where might not be able to get a full team out if there's possible rest, because you have to think a World Cup format is quite condensed. If, for example, Brazil won the first 2 games, match day 3, you just try and rest some of your best players ready for the knockout rounds where it gets to the nitty gritty and the more important stages. So that match day 3 could be a bit of a concern, and we just need to manage it the best way we think. So looking at that, probably 12th man, might want to use in 1 or 2. Wildcard might be wanting to use in match day 3, probably. Initial thoughts on that one. And then the third booster we've got is a power captain. So this will allow you to get double points from whichever player scores the most points from your 15-man squad. That's quite key there, 15-man. This player will automatically be assigned the captaincy. So this is, I can't remember it from past international tournaments, but I feel like this is quite different to anything we've seen before. So it's basically saying for this match day, probably the match day you think there's potential for your highest point score. If you've got 3 or 4 players you think could get double digits, even getting close to 20 points, play your power captain, and whoever does best in your whole 15-man squad will automatically get double points. It kind of, in a way, is taking away that risk of you having someone in your team who performs better than your captain. It's taking away that risk entirely, because it will be automatically assigned to the player who scores the most points. So there's an argument in each one of these first match days in the group stage to play each one of your chips. So maybe a 12th man in match day 1, power captain match day 2, and wildcard match day 3. A power captain, I quite like the 12th man. I'm not sure my opinions on the power captain. It just seems a bit strange in a way, because I feel like that's taken away some of the variance that you'll see in this kind of format, and it's quite sometimes difficult to differentiate, especially if you're using power captain in the knockout round. It'll be a bit strange, because I can imagine you'll get someone who's got 15 points, which is 5 clear of everyone else, so everyone would have power captain, the same player. But I like the thought of new ideas. It's a bit of a different one for that. Kind of a bit different to like a triple captain or something you've seen before, but I quite like the idea of the 12th man. It's an interesting one, but be interesting how we can maximise those. So it just mentions there you can only be used once, and multiple boosters cannot be used at the same time. So that's why you just need to think, if for example in match day 1 you don't use any of these chips, you need to bear in mind you'll have to use one of them in the knockout stage at some point, because you cannot use 2 at once. So we move on to transfers, which again I think is a pretty important one. So you will be given certain allocations throughout there. So pre-tournament, obviously going to match day 1, this table is quite handy to use as a guide. You'll get unlimited transfers before match day 1 as expected. I'm not just going to set you a team. And then if we take it as a group stage, between each group stage match day you will get 2 transfers. So you can make a few tweaks to your side. The key to this as well, within this group, you can roll over 1 transfer. But this 1 transfer is only going to be relevant rolling between 2 match days from what I can gather here. So yeah, during the group stage, 1 transfer can be carried over into the next group stage match. So it's only in the group stage, and it's a very limited period in the group stage. So you can't roll you can't get 3 transfers in match day 2. The only time you're going to have more than 2 transfers would be in this match day 3 here. So when you go into match day 2, if you make 1 transfer, you will get 3 transfers into match day 3, which I think could be quite a powerful strategy to plan for. So if you plan your team to be, so I completely went out of my head there. If you plan your team for match day 1 and match day 2, you might potentially want to save your wildcard to target kind of this quarter-final stage. So you might want to take some outrageous risks in round of 16, some more differential shouts, and then if they get knocked out, you've got the backup that you could wildcard in the quarter-final stage and get a total new team to make sure you've got everything covered, because you could have a possibility of having 3 transfers in match day 3. So it's just one of those things to think about with that roll in a transfer. and how much we weigh it up as an option, really, and how powerful we think that could be. It might be irrelevant, and we just want a wildcard in that week, so we just need to weigh up the fixture swings and how volatile we think that match day 3 is going to be. But I think it might become pretty irrelevant. Just bear in mind you've got 2 transfers, I think. Between any match day, you might get an extra 1, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge deal because you'll get to the round of the 16, you'll have unlimited transfers and you'll reset completely there. And then going forward from that stage, as you go through each round, you'll get an extra transfer. So before the start of quarterfinals, you'll have 4 transfers, semis 5, and the final 6. So you'll have to be slightly cautious when it comes to this round of 16, because if your player gets knocked out, then that's going to be a guaranteed transfer you're going to have to make, unless you're just going to have empty spaces in your 15 where you're just going to say they're knocked out and you won't have the opportunity to sub someone in that position. So just need to be careful in that knockout round, because it's kind of guaranteeing transfers. If you pick 2 players playing against each other, for example, if it was Argentina against Brazil in the quarterfinals, you pick 2 from each side, you're guaranteeing yourself you need to make 2 transfers. So it's just maybe take some educated guesses who you think will win in those knockout rounds, and to potentially have the best upside, but then it can also go badly wrong if there's a shock. So it's what you've got to look out for. So that covers the transfers. You've got a few scenarios here that if you want to go through, guys, in your own time, no worries there. And I think apart from that, there's not a lot more apart from the scoring to look out. There's a bit of talking about a lockout here, which is basically just locking your players as soon as they start playing in the current match day. And then the main bit we kind of just want to touch on, and it can vary from different fantasy games quite a bit, I think, from reading this, is a scoring system. Some of the parts are implemented into UCL Fantasy, but then there's also some tweaks compared to that. So the scoring system, slightly different. So appearance points, you only get a +1 when you get 60 minutes or more. So that's slightly different to what we generally see. This is for all players here. Assists pretty much the same, cards the same. We have really just the tweak, which is pretty similar to UCL Fantasy, that if you win a penalty or concede a penalty, you can get positive or negative points, rather than it being an assist in such a way. So then if we go back to, we'll go further down to every position. So for goalkeepers, clean sheet, if you must have, for a goalkeeper, they must have played 70 minutes or more to guarantee that clean sheet, but they will get +5 for that. Slightly different when it comes to conceding goals. The first goal conceded is 0, as generally it would be, but then every goal over the first one is a -1. So if you get, lose 5-0, for example, they would get -4, which is a bit of a yikes, of course. But a huge upside if you're going for a goal-scoring goalkeeper. If you find that magical one that can score 1 from the halfway line, you will get 9 points in the goalkeeper scores, which is absolutely huge. But that's like a 1 in a 3 or 4 year kind of thing, and I don't think in a World Cup you'd like to see that. Penalty save would get you 3 points, and for every save a goalkeeper, every 3 saves a goalkeeper makes, you'll get a +1 as well. Defenders, very similar to the goalkeeper. They must have played at least 60 minutes to qualify for a clean sheet, will be a +5, and then the goals conceded is exactly the same as the goalkeeper, and goals scored there'll be a +7, which is a boost slightly from what we see on other fantasy games. Midfielders play very similar here. Clean sheet, they'll get 1.4 after 60 minutes, goals scored 5, but they also can get some additional points. Every 3 tackles a midfielder will make, they can get +1. Every 2 key passes, which I think is definitely a new one compared to UCL Fantasy, every 2 key passes are +1 as well. So a creative midfielder, it's kind of a weighing it up there, because you want a midfielder that can tackle, but then also one that can produce key passes. So it's probably win-win, however, what midfielder you go for there. So it's an interesting little add-on there. And forwards, interestingly, I noticed on the forwards that a midfielder and a forward scoring a goal get exactly the same points. A forward is +5 and the midfielder is +5, which is interesting. And every 2 shots on target a forward has, they will get a +1 as well. So there's some quite interesting tweaks, and that kind of, we always think of a midfielder scoring as more valuable, but they get exactly the same points a forward for that, which is an interesting kind of tweak. And I think we just need to be careful with the kind of 50 minutes, 70 minutes. Obviously, I wouldn't expect a goalkeeper to get subbed off, but it's probably even more key that we have players that will get at least past the 60-minute mark, because when it comes to this all players bit here, they won't even get a point for the appearance if they end up getting 60 minutes or more. So there's a few tweaks there, pretty much in line with UCL Fantasy, I'd say, except for the extra points you get for certain items, like this obviously goal scores for the goalkeeper and that forward change, and then just the tweak on the key passes. So if you use our UCL content, it's not miles away from that, but there's quite a few tweaks. And obviously, I think the key bit about this World Cup format, as we'll see here, it just talks about league, mini leagues, and leaderboards. So we're not going to talk too much on that. But a key bit, I think, obviously changing from UCL to the World Cup, is that the match day is over a lot more days. So that's just what you've got to bear with. It's got a good schedule here. So the two key points are, so you've got this match day 1, which is over about 5 days here, 20th to 24th of November. And then there's some very quick turnaround between every match day. You're going to have to be on it like throughout a lot of these stages just to keep your head and up to date. I think all the way up to the last 16. After those, you get a bit of, well, you get a 2-day break between the round of 16 and the quarterfinals. But all the way from the 20th of November to the 6th of December, it's a constant football, which of course we love, but make sure you keep your teams up to date at the same time. So you've got to constantly be on it in terms of substitutions and changing your captaincy, and then also preparing for the next match day, which can be quite difficult because you're going to have to, if there's like an injury on the 24th of November to like a Neymar, or as a prime example, then you're going to have to do something for match day 2. So it's very quick turnaround, and just needs to keep your eye on the ball, especially group stage through to the round of 16, and then it eases off slightly. You've got a few days to think about it, but then we'll also have less players to think about, so it shouldn't be the most hard decisions when you get to that stage as well. But I think, guys, that gives us a decent little overview. Of course, if you've got any questions, please drop them in the comments. I hope that's a decent little guide for you before you start making your teams. You can obviously now start creating your teams. I believe the World Cup Fantasy app is also available. We're going to have a look at some building teams on the next video, which, like I said, potentially over the weekend, most likely it's probably be very early next week. We'll have a few drafting ideas and look at teams that we want to target. But I think for now, guys, that's covered the rules of World Cup Fantasy as we jump in to another kind of fantasy tournament, which I'm excited to see. So, as I said at the start of the video, if you've liked the content, please like or subscribe. I really appreciate that. It really helps the channel out. Appreciate all the love we've had on the UCL video so far this year. And above everything, as we get into World Cup Fantasy, enjoy the World Cup, enjoy the football, and just best of luck in your fantasy journey. But make sure you keep with us throughout the journey, and we shall see you on the next one. Have a great rest of your evening.